So good, so good, so good.
Great brands, great prices. Everyone's got a reason to rack.
You know they have Marc Jacobs?
Nike? Yes.
Just so many good brands.
Vince, Birkenstock, and more brands you love are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Plus, buy it online and pick it up in-store the same day for free. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
The podcast you're about to hear is true. The names have not been changed to protect the innocent, the guilty, or anyone else. If you're interested in the same type of discussion related to organized crime that you hear in the traditional media, stop listening now. If you're interested in thinking differently or learning something, turn up the volume on your computer, smartphone, or mobile device. This is The Racket Report. Here's Frank Morano.
Welcome to the Racket Report, the podcast that tries to take you behind the scenes of what goes on in the worlds of organized crime. I'm Frank Morano, and on this podcast, we have spoken to prosecutors who've prosecuted mob cases. We've spoken to defense attorneys, prominent defense attorneys. We've spoken to people that have known mafia killers firsthand, known them intimately, gotten to know them on a personal level. We've spoken with the authors of major mafia books. Well, this is the first instance where the guest that we have fits all of those descriptions. I am very, very pleased to be joined by a gentleman who I always knew was a master prosecutor and a skilled attorney. But until I started reading his books a few years ago, I don't know that I fully had a comprehension of what a gifted storyteller he is. Michael Vecchione was the former chief of the Rackets Division in the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, and he is the co-author of the new book, Homicide is My Business, Luigi the Zip, A Hitman's Quest for Honor. Mike, it's great to talk with you. Thanks for joining me.
Frank, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for those kind words. I'm very, very pleased to be back with you.
The pleasure is all mine, and congratulations on the new book. I can tell the amount of work that you put into this, and we're going to get into this throughout the next 45 minutes or so. But I've covered a lot of trials over the years, and one of the things that both on direct examination and occasionally on cross-examination that the attorney always has to do is lay a foundation so that the jury understands what's going on, so the judge can follow what's going on, and so that the answers that come afterwards make sense. As we look at Luigi Ronsisvalle, who I have to confess, until I read your book, I was totally ignorant of. As we look at Luigi Ronsisvalle, so much of his life and career as a criminal can be traced back to Sicily and mafia life in Sicily. So before we get into Luigi and what he did, lay a foundation for us. What was mafia life in Sicily like in the middle part of the 20th century?
Well, for the most part, it was controlled by the mob in Palermo. They were the ones who ran virtually all of the underworld in Sicily at that time. And unfortunately for Luigi, he was not born or raised in Palermo. He was born and raised in the town of Catania, which is on the east coast of Sicily, and Palermo was on the north coast. So they were sort of the B team, so to speak. People who were mafia figures in Catania didn't answer to the people in Palermo, but they were respectful of them and recognized that the major players in Sicily at the time were those in Palermo, and that kind of held back Luigi. Luigi, from the time that he was a little boy, wanted to become a made man, a member of the mafia, and someone who he called a man of honor. And when in his later in his life, when he testified in front of the President Reagan's Commission on Organized Crime, he was asked about that by a senator, and he said that was his quote essentially, that American boys grow up wanting to be baseball players, and in Sicily, Italian boys or Sicilian boys want to grow up to be mafia. And that basically summed up Luigi's life and the way that he lived his life and what he wanted to become. The mafia members or made men in Sicily were the kind of the people that everyone looked up to. In a lot of respects, Frank, they were the law, they were the banks, they were the people who supplied the food. They were as crucial to everyday life in Sicily as our law enforcement, our grocers, our bankers are here in the United States, and they did it all. They did it in terms of how they gained this respect. It goes back to ancient times in Sicily, because the Italian government looked down upon the Sicilian government and the Sicilians, and somebody had to fill that void, and the mafia filled that void and continued to fill the void into the time period that we're talking about.
And in your introduction to the book, you describe, and I'm a Woody Allen fan, so I certainly appreciate the reference. You describe Luigi Ronsisvalle as sort of a mafia zealot who's everywhere, involved in all these major mafia events in the latter part of the 20th century on 2 different continents, but his name never ends up in the news. Tell me a little bit about his upbringing. You talk about how he described always aspiring to be a made member of La Cosa Nostra. What do we know about his family life and his youth and when he first got involved in the mafia?
Okay. Well, we don't really know a lot about the early days, the days that he, when he grew up, other than him telling me that this was what he aspired to be, someone who others like him would look up to, because he looked up to the made men, or the men of honor, as he called them, both in Catania and elsewhere in Sicily, but mostly in Catania. He did not talk a great deal. So I would say that when he spoke to me, he led me to believe, and I kind of agreed with it after I thought about this a great deal, that his life, his living, the way he wanted to live, began when he had the guts to confront and to approach the main man in Catania, who was someone he called Signore Rapisardi. He never gave me his first name. He didn't call him Don Rapisardi. He called him Signore Rapisardi, which kind of struck me as strange, because I know these guys like to talk in terms of Don this and Don that, but he didn't say that. But his point to me was that he could not be what he wanted to be unless he took the steps to ultimately go to Rapisardi and say to him, I want to be what you are, and I need you to help me do that. And what he was looking for was a foot in the door, so to speak. He would do anything to get into Rapisardi's confidence, so that Rapisardi would trust him with slowly, that is, with some things, then some bigger things, and then finally what he ultimately became was a hitman. He tells me about the story of the first day that he went to confront Rapisardi, and Rapisardi owned a coffee shop in Catania, and Luigi knew that that's where he hung out, and he knew that that's the place where he was going to get to see him if Rapisardi would see him. So he walks into the coffee shop, and he starts to walk towards Rapisardi, who he describes to me, not in terms of the way he looked, but the way he was dressed. Luigi was always impressed by the dress, and particularly the shoes, and these guys wore, and that was important to him. That he wanted to look like them as well as be like them. And he starts to approach Rapisardi, and immediately one of Rapisardi's thugs steps in the way. And he goes, essentially, what are you doing here? And Luigi tells him, I want to speak to the Signore. And he basically says, get out of here, get lost. He didn't stop, though, Frank. He continued to go back until one day he caught Rapisardi's attention and was able to have a conversation with him.
About how old is he at this point?
Well, let's see. He got to us got to the United States in '66. So I would say that he was about 20, maybe 18 or 20 years old when he does this in Sicily, because he spends several years in Sicily working for Rappisardi, and when he comes to the United States, he's probably in his mid to late 20s or early 30s. Because when he came to me in '79, that was 13 years later, he was probably around 40-ish or so. So, to tell you the truth, Frank, the age never really kind of struck me as important in terms of
Right. I'm just curious for my own edification. If we're talking about a late teenager or somebody in his early 30s, you're in a different place in your life at both of those points.
No. He was a young man. He was married, however, because when he ultimately gets the first contract to do the hit, he's very concerned that he's got to leave his wife for a couple of days because he has to go to Milan to do this hit. And but I'm getting ahead of myself.
Sure,
I just want to say that when Rappisardi begins to use him, he begins to use him, kind of collect some money here. This guy owes me money for a bet. This guy owes me money because I'm a loan shark. I'm collecting money. And Luigi took his job very, very seriously. The idea that he was going to become a man of honor was always in his head, and he acted that way every time he was given something to do. And one of the things that he was also doing at that time, because he wasn't making enough money to support himself and his budding family at that point, was that he worked on the railroad in Sicily. He had different jobs on the railroad, but that was the legitimate job that he had, and he clearly didn't want that to be his life. He wanted to be one of those men who were able to sit in the coffee shop, dress to the nines, and drink coffee, read the paper, and then collect money, and make money. That was his deal. So he gets into Rappisardi's confidence, and he does it because he does his job very well, and he delivers for Rappisardi. And one day Rappisardi has this. Now he's able to feel comfortable with Luigi, and he gives him his first job, his first real job in terms of being a hitman. There was a businessman who lived in Milan who owed Rappisardi money. And Rappisardi, and he didn't pay him, of course. And that was that's a bad thing. He would lose face. He did lose face. People would think less of him if he would allow this to continue. And the businessman had to be hit. So he tells Luigi what it is that he needs to do, where he is, meaning the victim is where he's living. And he said in Milan. Now, this is another part of his personality and his life, Frank, that you'll get a kick out of. He didn't know anything about Milan. He didn't know anything about Italy.
Wow.
He knew Sicily. He knew Catania. And he told me that he had to figure out how to get from Catania to Milan. And he ultimately, knew that he had to take a ferry from his town across the, I guess it's the Adriatic right there, and to around Naples. I think it was around Naples, where he would be able to get the train to Milan. And that's what he did. So he had to figure out the ferry. Then when he got to Naples, he had to, navigate his way around the port there and get out of there and get to the train station and get up to Milan. Now, what I was saying before about his wife, and you asked me about his age, he was young, and young not only in years but also in experience. And he was very worried that if he disappeared for a couple of days, that his wife was going to start thinking that he was screwing around, that he was having an affair. And so he lied to her. He told her that it was all business. I mean, he lied to her in the sense that he didn't tell her that he was going to kill somebody. He told her that he had gotten, a job, and that he had to, go to Rappisardi. He had to go to Milan to take care of something for someone important. And he said to me that he brought her that night when he had to tell her. a big bouquet of flowers so that she would not give him a hard time in what he had to do. And he did it. He went to Milan, and he tells me the story about how, he had to figure out where this guy lived, where he worked, and do all the surveillance necessary to be able to find a place where he could hit this guy and be able to get out of there without being arrested. Now, the important part of that, Frank, is that is the way that he did his business each and every time he did a hit, whether it was in Sicily, whether it was in Italy, or was in the United States, in Brooklyn and in Jersey, wherever he did hits. This is what he did. And he learned that through and from the people in Sicily, the mentors that he had in Sicily. And so he does the hit in Milan. And he does. Then he tells me, he has to now retrace all of the steps. He has to get on the train, go down to Naples, get the ferry, get to Catania, and then he has to go home and explain to his wife why he was not around for a day and a half or 2 days, whatever it was. But then he shows up the next day after he gets home, goes to Rapasardi's coffee shop to get paid. And Rapasardi has the Italian newspapers, and there's the story of the hit of this businessman in Milan in the Italian newspapers that Rapasardi had. Well, that was a big deal for Luigi. It was sort of like his coming out, so to speak. It was the announcement that this guy was now one on his way to become one of these men of honor. And Rapasardi, of course, was very, very happy. And he gives him other hits. He gives him one in Rome. And Luigi began to get more confident himself. He does the one in Rome near the Trevi Fountain. And I'm sure you've been to Rome, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was there with our mutual friend, Arthur Aidala.
Okay, so then you know that the Trevi Fountain is a place that is teeming with tourists.
Sure.
But that's where he does, in and around the Trevi Fountain is where he does this hit in Rome. He does another one in Italy somewhere, and he does a couple in Sicily. And all of them, Frank, were for Rapasardi. And all of them, in Luigi's mind, were hits. And the people that he hit deserved to be killed because in his mind they were not honorable people, that they had done something that dishonored themselves and their family, and like not paying back a legitimate debt or not doing something that you promised to do. All of them that he hit were in that category, except one. But this has to do with honor as well. He heard from his colleagues on the railroad that one of their fellow workers had been criticizing and making fun of Luigi and saying things about him that were untrue, and he heard about it, and that was the kiss of death for this guy. Luigi told me it's the only time in Sicily that he ever did a hit for himself.
And now I would think that if he is carrying out all these murders in Sicily and in mainland Italy, that he would be on a mafia fast track, even in spite of whatever geographic or class limitations that he might have had to deal with, that he might have been on a fast track to being straightened out. But that wasn't necessarily the case. Why was that? Why was that not the case?
I never got, he didn't know, and I never got I never got an answer to that. Even during the research that I redid, and looked at other people, other authors who had written a little bit about Luigi in that time, I never got a true answer. And the only thing I came up with is that it was because of his background, and the way that he looked. He was not a guy that someone who was as spiffy, if you want to use that term, that as Luigi described Rapasardi. He was not that man, not that guy. He blended in. He was an everyman. In fact, when he walked into my office the first time I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that this guy was a hitman. The way he looked, he was about 5'6". He had this big round belly, the slick back hair. He just did not look like someone who I thought in my stupidity at that time would be a hitman. And that's the only thing I can think of, Frank, is that he didn't fit the profile, the profile that the Sicilians even would feel honored to have him as being part of their brotherhood. That was the only thing that I could figure out. And later on, you can ask me the same question about the United States. After all the hits he did for the Bonanos and then for the Gambinos in the United States, why? Well, it's because they considered him a zip, and a zip was something that was a derogatory term that American mafia members called the Sicilians who were coming over from Sicily to be kind of the muscle for the Bonanos. So that's what I think. He certainly was successful, and everybody who employed him was very happy with the way that he did his work.
In terms of Luigi coming to America, I'm going to ask you again to lay a little bit of a foundation here in terms of what mafia life was like in America and in New York specifically at this time. We've seen the influence of the 5 families, the 6 families, if you include the Cavalcantes in the New York, New Jersey area, wane and grow in different eras. At the time that Luigi came to America, what was mafia life like? And then if you can kind of dovetail that into a discussion of what exactly the pizza connection was.
Okay, sure. So at the time that Luigi came over, let me just start by why he came here I shouldn't say here, why he went to Brooklyn as opposed to Manhattan or Queens or any place else. And it kind of answers your question in a little bit of a roundabout way. When he went to Rapisardi and said to him, "I've done all of these things for you. I want to become a man of honor," Rapisardi told him that it was not in the cards, basically, and that he should go to Brooklyn, specifically to Knickerbocker Avenue to the Bonanno family. Now, the reason for that is that this is around 1966, before in the early 60s, maybe the late 50s, Joe Bonanno and Carmine Galante went to Sicily to set up a narcotics distribution network, and they partnered with the Sicilian mafia, and that word filtered down throughout Sicily even to the Catania people that Brooklyn was the place for Sicilian men to get to because the American mafia needed them. And here's why they needed them. And
what was Galante's role at the time?
Galante, I believe, was either a consigliere or an underboss. Mm-hmm. I don't remember specifically. I'm sorry, but I just don't recall. But he was very powerful. And Joe Bonanno trusted him. In fact, he was Joe Bonanno's driver at one point before he got into before he rose in the ranks, so to speak. And why they went to Sicily was to set up this distribution network, which ultimately became the French connection. That's where this thing kind of began, and they knew, Bonanno and Galante knew that they would, if they were not going to share in the big money that they expected to make and did make with this drug distribution, and I mean share it with the other families, that they were in for a lot of trouble. They were in for a war, basically, and they needed soldiers. They needed hitmen. They needed people strong-arm guys, and they set up this deal with the Sicilians. You're our partners. Send us people to act as our foot soldiers in the event that a war breaks out among the 5 families because they dislike us for not sharing in either not sharing at all or not sharing to the degree that everyone would be happy. So that was what was on the table at the time. When Rapisardi told Luigi, "You go. There's a place for you there. There's a reason why they will they will take care of you, and you will get made very quickly in Brooklyn because they need you.
And at this point, do you have any idea about how many murders Luigi had under his belt at the time that he came to America?
Well, he had. I always used the number 13, 14. He never, quite frankly, as much as I spoke to him and as many times as I spoke to him, he was not ever able to give me a specific number other than he figured it was around 13, 14. And that included several that he did in the United States. So my guess is that he did maybe about 8 or 9 in Sicily and in Italy, because he did around 5 or 6 that I know about, that he was willing to talk to me about. And Frank, I got to tell you very honestly, I still to this day believe that he held out on me in terms of telling me everything. And I know that now for a fact, because I know what he held out on in terms of the drug stuff that he told me that we found out about later on. So he comes to Brooklyn expecting to walk into a situation where they, with open arms, are going to accept this, Sicilian guy, and he was going to become, a man of honor very quickly as long as he met with the people who he was told to meet with. Rapisardi tells him to go to Knickerbocker Avenue, and he tells him to use his name. He said, when you go there and you speak to the people who are in charge, you tell them that I sent you. So Luigi is not given a name. He's not told, who's in charge on Knickerbocker Avenue. And at the time, it was a guy named Peter Licata. He was the guy who ran Knickerbocker Avenue for the Bananos. And it sounds like, well, what's the big deal about running, one street? Well, it's not really a street. That was their headquarters. And they whatever the Bananos were doing in Brooklyn came out of Knickerbocker Avenue. And Licata was the man in charge. And Licata's downfall is that he did not agree with this escalation of drug dealing that Bonanno and Galante wanted to engage in and were engaging in. He thought, the old mafia saw that, we don't do drugs or we don't deal drugs. Well, he believed that, and he never wanted to get into the business. Ultimately led to his death. He was assassinated because he didn't go along with the program, so to speak. So Luigi comes to Brooklyn, and he goes to Knickerbocker Avenue. He gets set up, first of all. Lands at JFK. He gets set up by a friend of his, one of the Sicilian guys that had come before. He gets an apartment in kind of East New York-ish, around not that far from Knickerbocker Avenue. And he's with now his wife, and I think by this point, he has 2 kids. So the guy sets him up, and Luigi now ultimately makes his way to Knickerbocker Avenue. And what struck me, Frank, was that his approach to the bosses on Knickerbocker Avenue was identical to what his approach was in Rapisardi. He walks in, not to a coffee shop, but into a social club that had a bar, and they hung out, and he walks in, and he sees a guy sitting at a table, dressed to the nines, with the shoes again. Again, he's always talking about the shoes and about the suits, and he says, and the guy was reading the Italian newspaper, and he was drinking, I think it was an espresso. And he says, that I know that's the guy I need to speak to. And it turns out that he was right. The guy's name was Pino de Quana. De Quana was Licata's second in command. And after, when he first approaches De Quana looks at him like he's, a Martian. Says, what are you doing here? Get lost. He said, drops Rapisardi's name. Didn't help. So he says, I learn. I leave, and I come back. And ultimately, to make this a short story, ultimately he gets to sit down with De Quana. I think he buys him either a Sambuca or he buys him a coffee. I just don't remember. And they begin to talk, and he tells him who he is and why he's there, and his ambition, who sent them, and all the, the background information that the Quana needed. And the Quana uses them pretty much the same way that he was used by Rapasardi. He used them to collect money. He used them to do a little strong arm work, and he's good at it. He's good at it, and he's not afraid to take on people who who are here in America, and he's a newbie. He's somebody who just is new to the neighborhood, and he catches Licata's attention, and Licata says to him, I see that you do a good job, and the other part of this is that Luigi was also a big gambler. And the way that he really catches Licata's attention is that Licata runs an illegal casino on the second floor of the building where his social club is. And he knows that someone's cheating him. And he couldn't figure out who it was and how they were doing it, other than the fact that there was some counterfeit money that was being used to place the bets. So he says to Luigi, you want to do some work? He says, I know you're good at gambling. He says, you go up there and I want you to watch. Luigi figured it out without any problems at all. He figured out who it was. He saw what was going on. The two guys were Gambino guys. They weren't even Bananos. They're sitting at a bar, and he approaches them and he basically says to them, you better not do this anymore. You better pay back Mr. Licata all his money. And that really got Licata's attention. And, and then he puts him in the position of collecting. Licata was a loan shark as well. And they were gambling, of course, and people owed money. People borrowed money. People owed him money. And he starts Luigi on this job of collecting debts. But he realizes that Luigi doesn't speak English very well. So he didn't, and Luigi admitted it. He says, how I collect debts, I can't talk to people. So they set him up with a partner, some old guy who couldn't collect debts any longer, who spoke English. And all Luigi did was basically strong arm, and he collected a lot of money. And that got him into the favor of both the Quana and Licata. But it also had another effect, and that was to kind of make other guys jealous that they saw that Luigi was starting to get the attention of the bosses, and they didn't like that. One particular guy who ultimately becomes Luigi's partner is a guy named Paolo Laporta, and Laporta was doing the work that Luigi was doing, which is collecting and strong-arming people and that kind of stuff. And now Laporta was told that Luigi is going to work with you because Luigi was starting to be able to speak better, and he's good at what he does. You take him and you work with him. So Laporta says, okay. And I'm sure you remember this from the book. Mm-hmm. Laporta tells him that we're going to go to a pharmacy in another part of Brooklyn, and the owner of the pharmacy owes Licata money, and we're going to rob him, and we're going to give Licata the money, and I'll pay him back. Luigi says, okay. They get into a car. He drives them to the pharmacy, gives him a gun. That is, Laporta gives him a gun, and he sends him in, and he says, I'll be right here. You go in, you rob him, you get the money, you come out, and we leave. Luigi walks into the place, and he announces what he wants, and the pharmacist reaches under the counter and pulls out a gun and starts shooting at Luigi. It's going to kill him. And Luigi now doesn't know what the fuck to do, excuse me, French, but he says that to me. I don't know what to do. He says, I run out. And he say, Mike, it's a good thing the guy was a bad shot because I was dead. He runs outside to get in a car, and Laporta had taken off. He set him up, and he took off. He never told him about the gun that the pharmacist had, and he was looking to eliminate his the competition, so to speak. Luigi was crazed.
I can imagine. And by the way, if people think we're covering a lot of ground now, we're actually not even going to be scratching the surface of all the great stories that are in this book. And I want to encourage people to check it out. Homicide is My Business. Luigi the Zip, A Hitman's Quest for Honor. We're talking with the author, Michael Vecchione. One of the people that becomes a pivotal character in your book and in Luigi's life is a fellow by the name of Michele Sindona. Explain to folks who Sindona was and what his intersection with Luigi was.
Okay. Sindona actually, his relationship with Luigi is how I got Luigi, how he come to the DA's office and become, the informant that he was for me and turned himself in. And it's a very simple but a little complicated story. Michele Sindona was an Italian financier who for years had been destroying essentially banks. He was buying banks and then essentially bankrupting them in Italy. He was hurting a lot of Italians who had kept their money in the banks, and when the banks went under, they lost their money. And he caught the attention. That caught the attention of the Cardinal Archbishop of Venice, who became Pope John Paul I. He knew what Michele Sindona had done to his people in Sicily, in Venice, because of the bank situation, and he was also, Michele Sindona was also instrumental in causing the fall of the Vatican Bank. What he was doing was he was using the Vatican Bank to launder money for the mafia in Sicily and in Italy, and ultimately the bank fell. But that's not where Luigi and he come in. What happens is, because when John Paul I became the Pope, they meaning Sindona and his people, knew that their honeymoon, so to speak, in terms of being able to take these banks and to use them, particularly the Vatican Bank, was over. That he was not going to allow that to go on any longer. And ultimately, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, ultimately they wind up poisoning him and killing him. The
Pope, I want to be very clear, the Pope John Paul I.
Pope John Paul I, yes. That Sindona was behind that murder. But Sindona and Luigi hook up because Sindona ultimately comes to the United States, causes another bank in the United States to collapse, which was called the Franklin National Bank. So he left he took his trail of essentially destruction of banks from Italy to the United States, and he gets caught in the United States. He's indicted by the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District. At the same time, he is also indicted in Italy for the fall of the various banks in Italy, and he's now a figure who is going to have to stand trial both in Italy and in the United States. And he's in the United States when the Italian problem rears its ugly head in terms of an indictment. And so the Sicilians, I'm sorry, I keep saying the Sicilians, the Italians want to extradite him back to Italy. The Americans want to try him here in the Southern District in federal court in Manhattan. So it's not a battle, but there are two now government agencies looking to nail Michele Sindona. And how does he take care of this? The only way that Sindona knows how, which is to get rid of the people who are causing the problem. So he wants to get rid of the prosecutor. And when I say get rid of, I'm talking about murdering the prosecutor in the Southern District, because he feels that if that guy goes away, then it will take a long time before someone gets up to snuff and he can make his way to Italy and be okay in Italy, because he was going to have someone kill the prosecutor / judge in Italy. So and that's how he was going to take care of all of his problems.
He was going to kill prosecutors on two different continents.
Correct. And he approaches Luigi Ronsisvalle, who was vouched for by the Gambino family. And he meets with him, and he tells him what he wants done. And he tells him he wants the guy in Manhattan to be killed, and he wants him not only to be killed, but he wants Luigi to plant drugs on him in his pocket so that he looks like a dirty prosecutor. And then he wants him to go to Italy and to kill the judge/prosecutor in Italy, and that will take care of all of his problems. And he tells Luigi, I will give you $100,000 for both for each hit. Now, at the time, Luigi was really hurt. He was always hurting for money because he was a big gambler, a big womanizer, and he was a drinker. So he spent and went through lots of money. So he tells him no. I'm not doing it. And that basically is the end for him, because he feels that now that he has turned down Michele Sindona, who is an international criminal, he's as good as dead. And he realizes that unless Sindona changes his mind and essentially lets him out of whatever penalty there's going to be, he's going to be a dead man. So he goes to Sindona and he tries to get him. I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. He's not making any money now. He tells Sindona no. Sindona is now really pissed off at him. By the way, Sindona goes and hires someone else to do this job. It doesn't get done though. The same two things. He didn't go. He went to the right guy the first time. He didn't get to the right guy the second time. It just never got done. But Luigi now knows that he's a marked guy. That doesn't stop him from trying to make money. And he does a robbery, Frank, in Queens that he believes is going to net him about $30,000. And it's a courier robbery, a money courier. And he shows up with his buddies, two guys who were going to split the money with him. And they see the courier, and the courier is a woman. And that was not something that Luigi was expecting, and it was not something that he would do. He said, I never rob a woman. We don't do that in Sicily. But I have to. I don't have no money. So he does. Except he opens up the bag when he gets the money. When he gets the money bag, and it turns out there's like $3,000 in there as opposed to $30,000. So it was really a double whammy. By the way, he gets caught. He gets caught immediately. Somebody must have seen it. The cops trailed the car. He gets caught. He goes into jail, and in Queens they set $500 bail on him. He can't afford $500. He calls Sindona, believe it or not, and says, "Help me out. I want to get out of the country. As soon as you get me out of here, I'm gone."
Your burger is served, and this is our finest Pepsi Zero Sugar. Its sweet profile perfectly balances the savory notes of your burger.
That is one perfect combination. Burgers deserve Pepsi.
I just want to be very clear because we got a lot of names going around here. So Sindona was the very same person who asked him to carry out this hit on the prosecutor. He turned Sindona down. Then when he's arrested in the aftermath of the courier robbery, he goes back to Sindona, the very same guy that he turned down for that murder for hire plot, and asks him to lend him $500.
Yes, and the reason is that Luigi feels that he's got something that he feels that Sindona can't turn him down, because he knows that Luigi has information about the hit, the expected hit on the prosecutor and the one in Italy. So in Luigi's mind, this guy will give me the $500 so that I get out of his life, and he hints at that. You can't turn me down, but Sindona does. He gets his brother-in-law to put the $500 up, and he gets out of jail. He calls Sindona again, and he says, "I'm out, but I want $30,000 now to get out of the country. I will leave you alone. You'll never see me again. If you don't, you know what may happen." And he's hinting at what he was going to do. Sindona ignores him, doesn't pay him. Luigi says, so I walk into the 9th precinct in Manhattan one day, and I say, I want to talk to the FBI. And that was his punishment. And basically, that was why he thought that Sindona would pay him, because he knew that Sindona knew that he had all of this information about Sindona, and that it would behoove Sindona to get him out of his life and get him out of the country, etc.
So his decision to cooperate was driven partly because he felt like he had no other options, partly
Correct.
due to survival, and also partly due to spite, right? Because he felt that he was wronged by these other fellas and seemed very bitter about the fact that he had never gotten straightened out either in Italy or in America.
That's correct. By this point, he's been here for years, and he hasn't gotten straightened out either. He's still a zip in the minds of all of the the American mafia. And he goes to the FBI and gives them the plot against the U.S. attorney, gives them the plot against the judge in Italy, and the FBI now had debriefed them totally, and he had given up his murders, and he also gave up. But there was one that the FBI zeroed in on because they were able to get him out of their hair at this point, rather than to keep him on, wherever they would keep him. And that was a murder in a restaurant in Brooklyn. He killed the chef of a place called New Corner Restaurant in the Dyker Heights, Bensonhurst section of Brooklyn. And that is the case that the FBI brought him into the, I guess it was Brooklyn South Homicide at that point, and told them this is what he has. And the cops they don't have the facility to keep, guys in protective custody, et cetera. So they brought him into the DA's office, and they walk in with this guy and, in handcuffs, and, they walk him into my boss's office. I guess I was the most senior prosecutor in the homicide bureau at the time. And my boss calls me in, says, these guys have an informant. He's an Italian guy. You're Italian. He's Italian. He's yours. And that's how I first meet Luigi Ronsisvalle. And I bring him into a conference room. I sit him down, and he looked terrible. I mean, he looked like he had been in the Brooklyn House of Detention for a while. And I said to him, "Are you hungry?" And he goes, of course he was hungry. And he said to me, I don't know if you remember from the book I wrote, that he said basically what they were feeding him was merde, which is crap, feces in Italian. And that was the food. That's how he characterized the food. So I said, "What do you want?" He told me he wanted a veal cutlet Parmesan hero and a beer. That was it, Frank. From that point on, every time I saw him, I got him a veal cutlet Parmesan hero and a bottle of beer, and he told me everything that he knew, except what he later told to the detectives that I turned him over to at some point in my time with him. And this is where we get to the pizza connection.
Okay, a couple of things I want to ask you before we get into the pizza connection case. One is about how you chose to tell this story. You wrote this book with Jerry Schmetterer, who I got to know through you before he passed away, and the two of you wrote this book. There's a lot of great stuff in here. You refer to yourself in the third person when you're a character in the book. You refer to Mike in the book rather than tell the story as you're telling it to me now. I did this, I did that. I'm just curious and I think it's very effective and I think it's very dramatic. It's almost like you're reading a novel. But why did you choose to refer to the character of Michael Vecchione in the third person rather than tell it from your own perspective?
You hit it. It is a much more, Jerry, I have to admit it was, Jerry not persuaded, but Jerry said, "Mike, it's much more dramatic if we tell it that way as opposed to I did this and I did that kind of thing." And I agreed with him. I thought that, it was almost like I could take a step back and not that I wouldn't be honest, but I could take a step back in telling him the story, and telling the story to the readers, as if I was, divorced from the whole thing and had learned it from another character. I mean, that's the best that I can do. And I think we succeeded, because if you felt that it was dramatic that way, that's what we
No
were
doubt
going.
about it. No doubt about it. I also just thought it was very creative and very unique. The other thing I have to ask before we get into the pizza connection is, I think a lot of people know from motion pictures that may deal with the criminal justice system, or even documentaries they may have seen having to do with the NYPD or the FBI, not just on mob cases, but on any sort of criminal case, that there very often seems to be a turf war between federal prosecutors and federal law enforcement and local prosecutors and local law enforcement. I'm curious, why was that not the case for you? Why were the feds so willing to let you go forward with using Luigi for getting the information about the homicide that you were investigating, rather than try to rope that into a broader federal racketeering case and charging him with murder in aid of racketeering federally?
Well, I think because they had what they needed and what they wanted, which was the information concerning the potential hit on the prosecutor in the Southern District, and also what the information about the potential hit on the judge in Italy. I think that's all, and I can't speak for the FBI and why that was enough for them, but it was. It was as simple as that they had what they wanted, they had what they needed, and now basically I got the sense that they didn't want to keep this guy around. They didn't really want to have to pay for him. They didn't want to have to, babysit him. So what they did was they said, well, he's got an open case in Brooklyn. Let's give him to the cops. And then the same mentality was with the police department. They didn't know what to do with him. So, what do you do? Well, let's go to the DA's office and they'll take care of him. That is, it's as simple as that, Frank. There was no other, other way of thinking in terms of what I discerned from the way things developed when they came into us. It was a matter of, he's yours now. You take care of him. You take care of him, and that's the way it developed.
I'm sure you know better than me, having not only lived many instances like this, but written about many instances like this. There so often seems to be times when law enforcement officials and the criminals that they are forced to work with, either through investigating or through being the handler. Obviously, we could do a whole mini-series on the DeVecchio Scarpa situation, but it certainly could also apply to Whitey Bulger and John Connolly, and a myriad of other prosecutors who then find themselves working with hardened criminals for a common purpose, generally being prosecution. And they become friends with these people, for lack of a better description, even though their life experiences couldn't be more different, even though their values in terms of right and wrong couldn't be more different. You mentioned bonding with Luigi over the beer and veal parmesan. Would you say that this guy that always aspired to be a mobster that killed 13 people, would you say that the two of you became friends?
I would say friendly as opposed to friends. I think that he trusted me, which was a big thing in his world. He knew that I was honorable in his mind, and I never gave him any hint of other than that. And I was I don't want to say it was the beginning of my career, because I had been in the DA's office by that point about 7 years, but I had never dealt with a guy like this before. So he was almost like he taught me a lot about how to deal with people like himself, and it served me very well for the rest of my career. So friendly, almost, I don't want to say a mentor is not the right word, but he was sort of a teacher in terms of how somebody like me could deal with someone like him who came from completely different backgrounds, obviously, other than we had that one connection, and that was our heritage, in terms of me being Italian and him coming from Sicily and from Italy. I would tell him about, my grandmother's, sauce on Sunday, and sitting down with my family, and that sort of got us to the point where we were on kind of a level playing field. He knew I knew him, but I don't know. I would call him a friend. I think that friendly was more appropriate. But I did develop a bond with him, and I do say in the book when I talk about the Michael character, I do say that I sit back sometimes and think about what I would have said to my grandfather and my father and my uncles about developing this relationship with this guy who was a murderer. Something similar to this happened when I had Greg Scarpa Jr. I had him for a year as an informant during the DeVecchio cases. And when he left, he took pictures with me. We broke bread together. We ate, lunches and we sat and talked. I mean, it's a unique, I don't want to say symbiotic, but it is somewhat symbiotic. I get stuff from him. He gets stuff from me, And
one thing that people may find surprising, you mentioned that Luigi couldn't even afford the $500 in bail because he was so destitute, and he only got $3,000 from that courier robbery, which he thought was going to get him $30,000. This is a guy that was a hitman for hire, right? Knew all sorts of high-profile mafiosi. Why was he such a brokester if he had done all this work for high-profile gangsters like the Bonanos and the Gambino family and Carmine Galante and folks in Italy as well? Why did he have no money?
Well, the first thing is he was a gambler, a bad gambler. He lost a lot of money gambling, a lot. And he did have a family to take care of, so he did have bills and expenses. His kids were going to school, etc. But it was mostly gambling, women, and whiskey. I mean, that was it. That's what he did. He was not. I have to say that one of the things that he was not proud of himself for. Guys killed 13 people, but he was more upset with the fact that he had let his family down because he was now in custody of the authorities, and he could not take care of his family the way he had envisioned taking care of them when he came to the United States. Sounds strange, right? He didn't, he wasn't remorseful about the murders. In fact, he told me that, except for one, they all deserved to die. And even that one, he did it for himself. That
was the Dante situation.
Yeah, the ISIS Queen of America. Yeah, the guy that he loaned him money. He wanted to become. And here's another example. He was a hitman, right? And he was getting paid for the hits. But he also felt that there was a lot of money to be made if he became a loan shark. Why did he think that? Well, he was collecting, remember, for guys in Sicily and for the guys on Knickerbocker Avenue. And he saw how much money the loan sharking business generated. And that was something he wanted to get into. But he didn't have the nut. He didn't have the investment. So he used a connection to vouch for him with a guy who could lend him $5,000 without interest. It was going to be a favor. And he went, and the guy did lend him the $5,000, gave him a hard time first, but he lent him the $5,000. And Luigi promised, I'm going to get it back to you within a week or two. I forgot what it was, because he had guys who were already set to borrow the money. And when he lent these two guys in Knickerbocker Avenue the money, and they didn't show up to pay him a week later, he was beside himself. What happened? They took off, Frank. They stole the money from him.
Wow.
And now he had to go back to this Gambino guy who had been vouched for with this guy and said to him, I can't pay you now. And the guy, instead of saying, don't worry, you pay me when you can, said, you got until Monday, which is a Friday. You got until Monday to do it. Luigi went absolutely out of his mind. He said, I can't believe that with all of the people vouching for me, that this guy wouldn't give me until Monday to get, only gave me until Monday to get the money back. And I was never going to be able to do it. So what he did was he went back to the guy's office that night and he shot and killed him. And he tells the story, and I think I tell it in the book, about how to cover his tracks, he went to the guy's wake. And who does he meet there but the loan shark's brother, who had taken over the loan shark's business. And the brother came up to him and said, "You owe me $5,000 that we lent you. I didn't forget that." And Luigi ultimately had to pay him. So that's a little insight into the world that these guys live in. And he, that's why he was always broke. He was gambling. He was a gambler. It's why he did the diamond robbery. Mm-hmm. I talk about the big diamond district robbery and how he got screwed out of that money as well, So, to get into, you had asked me about the pizza connection. The reason that he got into the drug dealing was that just for that reason, because he needed to make money, and he saw how much money there was that he was getting, that he would get and was getting in order to become a courier for the Bananos. And what had happened is the French Connection drug pipeline was stopped by the cops. And anybody who saw the French Connection movie knows that it was put to an end. And it dried up. And there's a conversation that we talk about, that I write about in terms of him and the Knickerbocker Avenue people. A guy named Puma, who was his drug partner at the time, said, "Listen, the pipeline stopped." So Luigi has to now make money because he was doing very well, transporting drugs from Knickerbocker Avenue that the Bananos gave him to Bensonhurst to the Gambinos, and he was doing very, very well. He could make a lot of money that way, and then it stopped. So what he had to do was find a way to make money, and he found out about this diamond potential for a diamond robbery in the diamond district in Manhattan. And he and another guy who he trusted do the robbery, and it was set up that the people who were involved, which were Gambino people and Bonanno people, were going to act as, when they did the robbery, they would act as the fence for the drugs. And this is the way it went down. He goes in with this other guy, and they do a robbery. $1 million diamond district robbery at the time, and that was a lot of money. He tells me that he gets the diamonds, and he leaves the store, and the plan was for him to walk from 47th Street and 6th Avenue to 47th Street and I think 1st or 2nd Avenue and hand the bag of diamonds over to another guy who was going to take off with it and bring it to the place, to the guy that was going to fence it. It's incredible to me that this guy could walk halfway, from one side of Manhattan to the other after this big robbery, and no one had any suspicion. No one stopped him. No one did anything, and he got away with it. And he handed the diamonds off. The plan was for him then to get on a plane and go to Chicago and hide out in Chicago until the heat was down and they could fence the diamonds. And while he's in Chicago, what happens is he gets a hotel room, and it's, let's say I don't remember the floor, but let's say he had a hotel room on the 7th floor. And it was a modest hotel room. And one afternoon or one morning, he meets a woman in the lobby of the hotel, gets into a discussion with him, tells him, she asks him where he's staying. He tells her. And she had a young daughter or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say young daughter. She had a daughter. And I believe she was trying to set Luigi up with the daughter. And she says to Luigi, "Why don't you come up and stay in our suite? My daughter is there. I'm there. We have a bedroom." And Luigi, as I said to you before, was a womanizer. This guy really liked women, and he liked gambling. He liked the booze, and he took her up on it. Packed his stuff up, left the 7th floor, didn't tell the hotel clerk, the desk clerk, that he was moving, and he moved upstairs to the penthouse. That night, 2 guys convinced the desk clerk to let them into Luigi's old room, and they just sprayed the place with gunfire, shot up the entire room. Obviously, they had been there to kill Luigi. And it turns out that the fence was a guy named Enzo Napoli, who did not like Luigi. He was a Gambino guy. He was the guy who set this whole murder plot up, and they missed. And Luigi went crazy again. When he got back to Brooklyn after a week or two, first of all he had to explain to the Chicago cops why his room got shot up, and he said they kept me for a day, and he talked his way out of that. He got back to Brooklyn ultimately, and he was nuts. He went nuts. He went to Knickerbocker Avenue. He spoke to the people in charge, and Licata said, "Don't worry, you can't do anything." He said, "I want to kill Enzo Napoli. I know it was him." And they set up a sit down to quell the entire, the whole problem, and to they hadn't even fenced the diamonds, and to split up the diamonds that had still been, in the hands of Napoli. So he shows up, Luigi and this guy that was with him, his buddy, whose name escapes me for the moment. They go to a restaurant in Manhattan early in the afternoon. No one's there except the guys that were supposed to be there, Licata, and there was Enzo Napoli, someone from the Gambinos, and the idea was to quash this entire problem that between Luigi and Enzo Napoli. And Luigi says, "I figured I'm going to get my share of the diamonds at this point." Well, it doesn't happen that way. They tell him that all he's going to get is $30,000, that he can't touch Enzo Napoli, and he's nuts. He says, "Are you crazy? This guy wanted to kill me." He says, No, that's the way it's got to be. He tells me that the diamonds are on the table, and they're separating them. They're giving them to all different guys. The Gambino head lawyer, some guy, he didn't know his name, gets a diamond, and this guy gets a diamond, this guy gets a diamond. He says, "There's one big diamond left." And I figure, well, maybe that one is for me. This is before he was told he was only going to get $30,000. He said, until some guy walks into the restaurant and everybody kind of like looks at him, and it's like the Pope is walking in. It turns out it was Paul Castellano, who was the boss of the Gambino family. He sits down at the table. They give him the biggest diamond in the bag. He takes it, he looks at it, gets up, and walks out. No questions asked. He said, "Mike, they give this guy my diamond." He said, I get $30,000. He never forgot it. And that was one of the things that was in the back of his mind, one of the events that was ultimately in the back of his mind when he decided that enough is enough. I'm going to get out of this. So that doesn't help him in terms of getting, money. And now he doesn't know what to do. And he gets a call from his old friend Puma. Puma tells him, "Come to Knickerbocker Avenue." And he says to him, "You know how there's a pipeline of oil that comes from someplace to the United States and we get oil?" And Luigi says, "Yeah, I guess." He says, "Well, we got a pipeline now again." And what this was what ultimately became known as the Pizza Connection. Again, Galante, the Nano set this up. They had taken money and set up various people all across the Eastern Seaboard as well as into the Midwest in pizza stores. And what the plan was for drugs heroin to be smuggled from Sicily, from the laboratories in Sicily into the United States in cartons of pizza products. Mozzarella and tomato sauce and flour and the drugs were being hidden among the goods to make pizzas. And then once they got to the pizza place that was part of their organization, they would separate the drugs from the pizza stuff and give it to whoever was coming to pick it up, and ultimately those drugs got transported across the country. Luigi becomes a courier like you cannot believe. He gets to Knickerbocker Avenue. They tell him exactly what's going on now. The pipeline is open, but drugs have to get from Brooklyn to Los Angeles, from Brooklyn to Chicago, from Brooklyn to Miami, and from Miami to Brooklyn. So they tell Luigi, "This is what we want you to do," and they're going to pay him handsomely. So he says, okay. He hated dealing the drugs. He knew that it was not honorable in his mind to deal drugs. So they say, "Here's what you got to do." They give him a lesson. They tell him, "You got to go buy a suit that's 2 or 3 times bigger than your size. And then we're going to stuff the pockets of the suit with packages of heroin. You then go to the airport and you wait until the very last moment to enter, to get onto the plane. Just as they're closing the doors, you run on so that nobody has any questions. And of course, this is before 9/11, before anybody had any metal detectors or anything. And you sit in your seat, and you never get up until you get to Los Angeles. He said, and the one thing he was told, never fall asleep. Never fall asleep. Now, how do we know all of this? Well, this is not him to me, but at some point when he's finished with me, I turned him over to our squad in the DA's office. They were investigating Knickerbocker Avenue. They got everything that they wanted from him. He gave them information about the Carmine Galante homicide. So he was known to a detective in our office whose name was Kenny McCabe. And I told you, Frank, it was always in my opinion that he was not giving me everything. But he gave me what I needed. And he takes a plea to the New Corners restaurant murder, and he goes away. He was able to do his time in a federal facility. I think he got 4 years. I don't remember exactly.
Now, what was a prison like for him, given the fact that people knew that he was a cooperator?
Well, it was he was okay. You know why? Because he was kept in the federal facility he went to was in Sandstone, Minnesota. The end of the earth for him. It might as well have been the moon for as far as he was concerned. He was so far away from civilization, and it was designed. The part of the prison that he was housed in was designed for cooperators and people who had given information to various law enforcement, and that's where he lived. He lived in a place with everyone who was like him, guys who were rats in their terminology. Look, when he was in the Brooklyn House of Detention, I kept him in protective custody, also with people who were cooperating, but cooperating with local authorities like us, which is how he met a guy who wanted him to kill his brother. But that's another story. So he's in Sandstone, Minnesota, and keep in mind now he's been transporting drugs to Los Angeles, to Chicago in bags of valises, and he would walk out of the Union Station in Chicago, meet a guy who pretended to be a taxi driver. They'd get in the car, he'd drive around the corner, he'd leave the bag and go back into the train station and get back on the train and come to New York. He was also traveling to Miami to pick up drugs in Miami and transport them all the way from Miami to Brooklyn in the back of a Porsche. They had all of this heroin in the back of a Porsche, and he sat in the passenger seat with a shotgun between his legs to protect the merchandise from any kind of robbery. Another unbelievable thing, Frank, that he went from Miami to Brooklyn on these trips, not stopped not one time. Going through the South, you would think that that these these two guys in this Porsche would get stopped by some local yokel cop down there just to break their chops, but he never got stopped.
It's amazing.
Never. And my point is that when he was transporting all of this stuff, and he was now in Sandstone when he got word from his lawyer that President Reagan had established this presidential commission to investigate organized crime, and that one of the sessions was going to be about drug dealing. So he had firsthand information, and he reached out to Kenny McCabe, and McCabe brought him into Brooklyn. They sat down with him. He sat down with him, and Kenny realized that this guy had information that was valuable, and he turned him over to a former detective who worked with us and who I went to grammar school with, a guy named Doug Lavienne, I know Doug's son Vinny quite well. Yeah, yep. Doug was working with Reagan's commission, and he turned him over to Doug, and Doug prepared him with I forgot the guy's name who was running the commission. The lawyer, and he testified in Miami, of all places, in front of the president's commission. But he had the drug information when he was talking to me, but he held it back, Frank. He was a calculating guy, and I think he had that always in his pocket as, something which he could give up and when it was necessary. And life in Sandstone, Minnesota, was not something that was palatable to Luigi. So shortly after that, I saw Kenny McCabe at a going away party or something, or some kind of an event. And I said to him, what's up with Ronsisvalle? What'd you do with him? He says, I turned him over to Doug. And I knew Doug was working for the President's Commission at the time. And he testified in front of the President's Commission. And he testified all about transporting the drugs, how they came into the country, who set it up, everything. There was a story in the Miami Herald, or one of the Miami papers, as well as a New York paper, that caught the attention of Rudy Giuliani and Louis Freeh, who were Freeh was a prosecutor at the time. Giuliani was the U.S. attorney in the Southern District, and they were doing the Pizza Connection case. And they realized that this guy was gold in terms of a prosecutor, and they brought him in, sat him down, and prepped him, and he wound up becoming the star witness in the Pizza Connection case, and went off to witness protection after that.
And he finished his life in the witness security program.
Well, he did, but before he finished his life there, he hated it as well. He hated witness protection because, again, he was moving from one small motel to another.
Sure.
I mean, he cooked up this idea to contact the head defendant in the Pizza Connection case was a guy named Toto Catalano, who had taken over from Peter Licata as the main man on Knickerbocker Avenue. And he contacted Catalano's lawyer and told him that he wanted to recant. And he gave him the excuse that he was sorry, he was a man of honor, and that he didn't realize what he was doing. There was so much pressure, and that he would recant and go into court and say that he lied when he testified against Catalano. What he wanted, Frank, this was all he wanted Catalano to pay him money and to take care of him for the rest of his life. And when the lawyer debriefed him in a motel room in Cincinnati, Ohio, over the course of several days, he kept saying to the guy, well, when are we going to talk about, and he would rub his fingers together, indicating the money. When are we going to talk about how, you're going to help me? And of course the lawyer was saying, I can't promise you. I can't buy anything. I can't buy your testimony. You've got to do it, because you say that you lied. He did it, Frank. He did it. He signed paperwork saying that he lied, and it was filed in federal court in Manhattan. And before it was acted upon, Luigi recanted his recantation. He realized that going back to jail was not something that he wanted, and that the witness protection was better than behind bars. So it worked out okay for him, but he went back into witness protection, and ultimately, Frank, he killed himself because he couldn't make it in witness protection, and the pizza ended a very colorful life, my friend.
No, that's for sure. The Pizza Connection case, his recanting of the testimony, that didn't have an impact in the convictions ultimately, though, right?
It did not. It did not, because first of all, there was other evidence, and ultimately, meaning Giuliani and Freeh, were able to convince the judge that the recantation, the initial recantation, was because he said to them that he was afraid that he was going to be found out wherever they kept him and that he was going to be killed. So rather than, living with, having to look over his shoulder all the time, he decided to recant, even though he actually told the truth at the trial. That's what it ultimately came out. And the judge bought it. So he did not set aside the verdict.
I've gotten to know Rudy a bit because he hosts a radio show on our station, and we're pretty friendly. And the thing that he is, the only subject that he's more passionate about discussing than politics is the mob. He loves discussing the mob, even stuff that's happening now, stuff that happened when he was a prosecutor, stuff that happened 40, 50, 60 years ago. How would you rank Rudy Giuliani in terms of being a mob prosecutor?
At the top of the list. at the top of the list. The guy, I have to rank him there because he's the guy who, who tested basically the whole RICO law in terms of the commission case. That was a landmark case as far as prosecution is concerned. And this pizza connection was not that far behind in terms of its effect on mob life. He basically put this entire concocted, and I say that in not in a derogatory sense in terms of this connection from Sicily to the United States, and the idea of hiding all of this stuff in pizza cans was a genius move. And he was able to take it down and to convict everybody on the list. In the back of the book, I had the indictment, and you could see how extensive the indictment was in terms of the pizza connection. So I rank him at the top of the list, Frank.
Carmine Galante, who obviously had some interactions with Luigi and was an integral part of the leadership of the Bonanno crime family. The photo of his murder is one of those famous mafia photos that everyone shares, and it's been memorialized in motion pictures and so forth. Why was Carmine Galante killed?
It's so simple. You're going to say, why didn't I think of that? You know what it was? Greed. He did not share with the rest of the people who were working for him to the extent that they thought that they were owed. He had all of these guys who were and the Bonanno people killed him. Valdo Amato and Cesar Bonventuri, who were his bodyguards, were basically responsible for his death. And the rest of the Bonanno family were essentially pissed off at him because he was not giving them enough money. He was not sharing. They were making millions of dollars a week, Frank. Millions a week.
Wow.
So they wanted more of the pie, and he didn't give it to them, and that's why he was killed. There's a lot of talk in law enforcement that when Galante got out of jail, and he had been in jail for in different places, but when he finally got out of jail, I think he was in Atlanta prison. The lore is that it was dropped by FBI people and other feds into the minds and into the ears of mafia people all over New York that he was looking to take over as, capo di tutti capi, the head, the number one guy. And they felt that, that would, and it did, they put a mark, a big mark, a black mark on his, or a target on his back. And I had bought that, that argument, or that theory for a while, because I was teaching at St. John's. I was teaching a course in the history of organized crime, and I taught it for many years. And that was what I had always thought was the reason. But when I started to do the research for this book, I realized that it was more basic, and that was greed. There's only one thing the mafia cares about, and that's money. And when they can make more money and they don't, then they look to hold someone responsible for that. And that's what they did. They held Galante responsible, and they killed him.
Joe Bonanno is one of the few mafia figures, certainly one of the few mafia figures that seems to have gotten to retire without going to prison or being killed. How come he got to do that? What was so special about Joe Bonanno?
Well, I think part of it was that he was been around so long and had so many connections, deep connections into the mafia before, when it was being formed in those days. He was working for so-and-so, and he became for various people. I think that they just respected him too much. And I really believe that that's why he wasn't killed. He had just been around long enough to earn that kind of respect from them. And even though he was going to, and he was shunned. I mean, he was sent to Arizona, or allowed to go to Arizona to retire, because he had been part of a plot to kill Carlo Gambino and take over. That's what his main idea was to become, the head of the New York Mafia. And Joe Colombo gave it up. I mean, Joe Colombo was approached to do the hit, and he gave it up. He went to the commission, the heads of the families, and said, "Look, this is what's going on." And that's how they got rid of him. But I think it was purely a matter of him being around and having enough people saying to those that would be pulling the strings here, let him just retire and go. And that's what happened.
One of the things that frequently gets debated and discussed is sort of the ethics of turning state's evidence or becoming a rat. There's always a lot of judgment, not just by defense attorneys or mafiosi either, but even among regular people, about folks that spend their whole lives committing crimes, including murders, and then when it comes time to pay the piper and go to prison for a lifetime of misdeeds, they instead choose to rat on all of their criminal cohorts and in some cases exaggerate or make up lies about their criminal cohorts. Do you think that applies to Luigi, the sort of negative connotations that so often comes with the ethics of ratting? Do you think Luigi deserves a bad rap for that?
Well, he I think that in a different setting, in a different situation, without the Michele Sindona problem looming over him, I'm not sure that Luigi would have gone to the extent that he went. I really don't. I think that it was, as you say, self-preservation. He believed that Sindona was such a powerful figure in the underworld that he turning him down was a black mark that would never be forgotten, and that ultimately someone would get to him. And I think that was his motivation. I truly believe that it was something that in another set of circumstances he would not have done. I think he would have gone to his grave, quite frankly, keeping all of those secrets, but realized that in order to save himself and his family, and it was mostly his family, but him, of course, but he knew that he had to continue and do what he did. And that's the motivation for a lot of these guys. Some of them is that, I don't want to go to jail for the rest of my life. For Luigi, it was basically, I need to preserve my life for as long as I can, and my wife and my kids. The first thing he said to me, Frank, well, one of the first things after the veal cutlet and the beer was, are you going to take care of my family the way that I was told that they would be taken care of? And I said, yeah, I told him that we would. And I believe that one of the things that he thought about was Sindona was such a devious and such a bad guy that ultimately he would have gotten him, and he probably would have gotten his family too. So
I love this book, Homicide is My Business. It would be a great motion picture. These are stories that I've never heard before, and they're told so vividly and there's never really been a film like this, sort of combining the American mafia, the Italian mafia, a hitman's battle with his own ethics, his own conscience. If you had to pick, given your own experience as an author, as an attorney, as a prosecutor, as somebody who's researched a lot of mafia cases over the years, what do you think the most realistic motion picture is depicting the mob life, criminal prosecutions of the mob? If you had to pick one, what would it be?
It would be Goodfellas. And Goodfellas, and shortly beyond, just not that far behind it, Donnie Brasco. And because both of them show the and I'm going to use the term underworld, but show that these guys are basically lowlifes. I mean, they are the worst of the worst. And there's one scene I'll never forget in Donnie Brasco where they're talking about breaking into parking meters because they were so desperate for money. And I believe that really depicts mafia life, as opposed to something like The Godfather, where it's glamorized or some of the other things. But those are the two, and I think that they both depict the real grit of and the dirty part of mafia life. It's not glamorous at all.
The book is terrific. Homicide is My Business. I'm encouraging everybody to check it out. It's available on Amazon.com and most bookstores. Its author is Michael Vecchione. Now, Michael, you've already been very generous with your time. I thought this was going to go 45 minutes. We ended up talking for double that. But I have to ask you about this because, and if you don't want to answer, I wouldn't blame you because I'm kind of throwing this at you out of the blue. But the last edition of this podcast that we did, we spoke at length with Peter Lance about the Greg Scarpa, Lynn DeVecchio case, and he discussed your decision to not continue with the prosecution of Lindley DeVecchio. If you're game, I want to play for you what he said and then just get you to react to it since you're here. Okay, yeah. This is Peter Lance addressing the prosecution of Lindley DeVecchio.
But I think that not only did she only really fully contradicted one of the four cases and involving Joe Domenico. Okay, Joe Domenico was the one case I believe that she absolutely did not, but she was equivocal in her language about the second case that Vecchione described. And two of the murders, of the four murders, she didn't contradict at all. So this is what Mike Vecchione did that was astonishing to me is he painted himself into a corner on the basis of just hearing these, very briefly hearing these recordings. He stood up there and said, "Judge, we're throwing the towel in," effectively. Mm-hmm. He didn't say, "Your Honor, we want to finish our case in chief. We want to make our full case. There are many witnesses." And by the way, it wasn't just he later called her the rock. The key witness, that they based their entire case on. That's absurd. They had many, many other pieces of evidence that pointed to Lynn DeVecchio's conspiracy with Scarpa, including the testimony of these FBI agents who, they did a terrible job of cross-examining and rehabilitating. But another thing that had happened, let me just say this, that Mike Vecchione couldn't present the case himself, really. He had to step back. Because several members of the office were tainted because they had looked at some of the immunized testimony of Lynn DeVecchio in the OPR, and there was what's called a Castigar violation. So he was actually counting on his third team after months and months of preparation, literally went to trial in this incredibly high-profile case after doing multiple cases himself over the many months before then. So he was kind of exhausted. He wasn't presenting the case himself. Assistants were. And they had a lot of other evidence, including two of the murders that were unbelievably powerful that Linda corroborated. And I was able to corroborate her testimony.
Your thoughts on what Peter Lance said there? He thinks you should not have dropped the case after it came out that Linda Shiro was not being truthful about one of those murders. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I did present the case. I tried the case. I had some people helping me, but I tried the case. So I have no idea why Lance says that, I was too exhausted to try it. And I had just come through about 3 or 4 other cases, corruption cases with judges and politicians, et cetera. He's right about that. And I did ask the judge to put the case over till after the summer, from the spring to a fall trial. That's all true. But I tried the case. What he's talking about is early in the case, I had to give the early part of it, the Castigar hearing, to 2 other people in my office who were part of my team to handle, because I was going to be a witness in that. The allegation was that I had read the immunized testimony, the federal immunized testimony of DeVecchio, and that was not the case. I had never seen it, but I couldn't be my own. I couldn't be my own attorney in terms of asking questions. So that part of the case was handled by someone else. But I tried the case. That's the one thing. The second thing is the decision was made. I was not the district attorney. Okay. So without more being said, when it was brought to the district attorney's attention as to what Linda had said previously about some of the allegations that were now on trial, it was the district attorney's position that she was unbelievable. I mean, it was that she had been hurt so badly by this that it would be it would not be fair for us to continue. That was his decision, and it had something to do with the judge as well, because the Judge Reichbach said, it's hard for me now to go forward with this. And it was a judge trial, it wasn't a jury trial. So there was a combination of things. But I had to stand up at the end of the day when decisions were made, okay, and say that I had to dismiss the case because of the reasons that I gave. Lance doesn't have it totally correct. And it was, and I'm going to be candid with you, if it was my choice, I would have gone forward with the one case that I thought was, the one murder that I thought was unaffected by Linda's testimony. And that was the killing of their friend, who they thought was an informant, and I forgot his name now. It's got
to drive you crazy that DeVecchio.
I think his name was. Yeah, I think it was Pete. Yeah, and I would have gone forward with that. But you know what, Frank? I was a soldier in the DA's office. I was not the general.
Michael, it is always a treat to talk with you. I will look forward to seeing you soon. Good luck with the book. I hope everyone checks out Homicide is My Business.
Thank you very much for having me, Frank. And I urge your. And by the way, I just want to say that the audio book of Homicide is My Business will be out on November 15th.
Thank you, Michael Vecchione. The book is Homicide is My Business. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a friend. If somebody sent this to you, please subscribe. You could search The Racket Report on any podcast app. And be sure to catch me on the radio on WABC every morning from 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. Until the next time we meet in cyberspace, I'll see you on the radio.